Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
If you're looking to invest in physical precious metals or convert your 401k to a precious metals-backed IRA, please consider making your investment with our trusted partner, Metal Stacks. Their prices regularly beat the big sites and they have no credit card fees or minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. Just visit metalstacks.com/dwalker or get there from our website, freedomstate.us. If you're interested in the IRA conversion, drop me a message at Danielle at freedomstate.us and I can get you connected with their white glove service. Welcome to the State of Freedom, everybody. Good morning. And as a reminder, we are grounded here in faith and the Constitution. We're committed to giving voice to the truth, living with courage, and taking action. It's Tuesday, October 14th at 10 a.m. Central. I'm Danielle Walker, and I'm joined by my friend, fellow host, Chris Alexander, also fellow warrior. We are coming to you live on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook. If you're catching us later, you can listen right here wherever you're listening, or you can always catch us on our audio platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast. Well, today we will be continuing the conversation on the carbon capture scam and its progress in Louisiana. Our guest today, let me bring him in. There he is. Our guest today is Scott Eustis. He is the Community Science Director of Healthy Gulf. He's got an extensive background in wetlands and fisheries research, and his work with Healthy Gulf is focused on analyzing wetlands restoration projects and other developments that stand to impact our wetlands. Welcome to the show, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, before we get into it, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Hebrews chapter 2, verses 15 through 18. And it says, by embracing death, Jesus sets free those who live their entire lives in bondage to the tormenting dread of death. For it is clear that he didn't do this for the angels, but for the sons and daughters of Abraham. This is why he had to be a man and take hold of our humanity in every way. He made us his brothers and sisters and became our merciful and faithful king priest before God, as the one who removed our sins to make us one with him. He suffered and endured every test and temptation so that he can help us every time we pass through the ordeals of life. And don't we pass through the ordeals of life? Goodness. Jesus is the answer and solution to every fear we may have, including death. When we come to him in humility, in honesty, repentance, and faith, he receives us no matter what we've done. And he releases true freedom into our lives, making us completely new creations in him. His suffering paid the full price so that we can be transformed and restored to his original intent for us, which is purity, righteousness, and right relationship with God. There's nothing that we face, no difficulty that's too big for him. If we seek him, if we pray, he'll come and help us every single time.
There's nothing too big for him, Danielle. That is so
That's
true.
right.
Nothing too big for him. And fortunately, he forgives us. Sometimes he forgives us more often than we forgive ourselves. And, there was a great Jesuit priest that I knew when I was in college who used to say, you know what? I think the world would be a different place if everybody could sort of look at themselves just for a few seconds the way that God looks at them. And if we could do that, then I think that our perspective on everything would probably change.
And that's a prayer we can pray, Chris. We can pray that prayer that God would show us how he sees us. It's a powerful prayer.
show us how you look at us and how you look at me. And one thing that God expects of us is to take care of the environment that he gave us.
That's right.
Not only for ourselves, but for the next generation. And our guest today, Scott Eustis, has spent an awful lot of time doing just that. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today for a little while in the State of Freedom, sir.
Thanks for having me. Glad to spread the word about what Healthy Gulf and a lot of other groups around the lake are doing to fight back against CCS and its tremendous impact on our wetlands, and particularly our wildlife areas, places that we've gotten together and say, hey, these places like Lake Maurepas are places where we want to preserve the environment and keep it for harvest, for enjoyment. But it seems like there's a company, Air Products, and some other companies that have said, well, every place else in Louisiana has been drilled through, so we can only use your protected spaces to accomplish this carbon waste injection technology. But for us at Healthy Golf and for a lot of people in Louisiana, that's just completely unacceptable. So we've called for hearings and an environmental impact statement on the project. 2 years ago, there were hundreds of people at the Lions Hall in Ponchatoula that said the same thing. And in that room, Air Products, they agreed to it. They agreed to this higher level of environmental review for one of our sacred spaces in the state. They called it environmental impact statement as part of their federal permits. But they've reneged a bit on that.
So Scott, so they agreed then to have a formal environmental impact study done,
Mhm.
and yet now they have gone back on that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in October
Okay.
of 2022, in that room with probably about 200 folks. But we didn't have it on the record.
Yeah.
This hearing that we have on November 4th, it's at the New Wine Church in St. John Parish, is on the record. There will be state and federal stenographers taking it for the record. But
That's good.
it's disappointing that the company recognized that they were doing something a bit out of line and needed to take more care. But as the calendar has flown, they've pulled back on that promise.
Yeah.
Scott, can I just ask you on that point, do you think that they have pulled back on that promise, or do you think they've pulled back on the release of what they found? Because part of me wonders, well, let's go ahead and do the environmental impact study, and then whenever they start uncovering just how horrific it would be to the environment, then it wasn't really beneficial for them to share that information.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a lot of new information as, we've had a lot of renewed attention on Lake Maurepas. Certainly people before my time were interested in protecting this place as well as groundwater across the state, but particularly this place. But some of the attention that Southeastern was given to the lake, we have some metals contamination in the lake, as a lot of wetlands do. Has some mercury contamination, and it can be a problem that is a sleeping dog. It's in the sediment, but it's down deep. It's not necessarily mobilized in the water or causing a problem. But certainly a project like this that would excavate the lake bottom would remobilize some of the metals that were there. And I think what's happened this year is that southeastern scientists studied that, looked a little more closely, and found a lot more metals contamination
Yeah, and
than
and apparently the scientist who discovered that was rewarded with a ban on continuing her research, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, this is not a new thing for our state. Some of the initial moves to protect Lake Pontchartrain ran into similar problems where scientists who found the wrong thing or reached the wrong conclusion were relieved of their duties or promoted into a closet.
Yeah.
Or
Nothing like academic freedom in America.
so I think
Before we got started, Chris and I were talking about it seems like these days, a lot of times, unfortunately, the science follows the money instead of the science just being allowed to be its own
That's a
honest
great
truth.
point. That's a great point. Unfortunately, in almost every discipline, that's the case, Danielle. Got a couple of quick points here, Scott, and I don't know whether you were there or not, but in 2023, and perhaps at another time, there was a bill offered in the state legislature to impose a 10-year moratorium on CCS development on Lake Maurepas and the Lake Maurepas swamp area. And of course, it was defeated in a Republican dominated legislature because of a lot of big moneyed lobbyists who were there promoting carbon capture sequestration, but the effort was certainly made. And regarding your environmental study here, does it surprise you at all? Two things that 2020, when the bill essentially authorizing eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration, declaring carbon capture sequestration a public good, that was done not only with no legislative debate, but was done without precisely a requirement for the sort of environmental impact study that you're talking about here. That thing just breezed through the legislature. I mean, you and I and Danielle have spent more time in the last 7 minutes talking about this issue on its merits than the legislature did while debating this bill.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on that? That this was predicated on, the whole thing was predicated on the idea that this is good for the environment, yet your position, the position of Healthy Gulf, and the position of a lot of other groups is precisely the opposite.
Well, I think that speaks to the lobbying. I think there have been efforts for this CO2 waste injection since around 2009. 2008, 2009 was that a more a wave in the past of government support saying, again, this is good by fiat, we're going to do it, and it's supported by a lot of industry lobby. So a lot of laws were passed in that phase. 90% of those, and that was funded by the Department of Energy instead of a tax credit at that time. Since then, the US GAO, the General Accountability Office, said that 90% of those federal dollars were spent to no effect. And some of them were able to be clawed back even. But the point, we haven't seen improvement in the technology or engineering improvements. We've only seen a drastic increase in the money spent on lobbying. So when people went to the legislature opposed to this project in Lake Maurepas, opposed to the projects in Vernon Parish, they had found that there had already been kind of a lobbying effort by industry to push this through. And when we opposed the Air Products, I believe, was reported to hire about 22 lobbyists.
25.
25.
Yeah, sorry. A distinction without a difference, possibly, but yes, it was 25. And I only remember the number, Scott, because it just stunned me that they were hired specifically for that purpose, to invade the Louisiana legislature for purposes of promoting this scam.
And a lot of your representatives will say, well, we didn't know. We were just listening to the people talking to us. And so that's why we've got to mobilize people power, as we're doing on November 4th in St. John Parish, to educate each other about these risks and damages, and to show numbers for the politicians so they know that this is going to affect whether or not they remain in office.
Yeah.
I think
Your background, Scott. Just for the benefit of our listeners, both academic and with respect to what you've done on a practical level for many years, is in ecology and marine and environmental science. And it's your position and the position of Healthy Gulf that this exercise, this carbon capture sequestration exercise, is not, even if you believe that excessive CO2 emissions are harmful to the environment, CCS is going to do nothing, in your view, to reduce those emissions.
yes, there's a lot better solutions to air pollution. The CCS technology, the cattle have left the barn. It's a bit silly to try to suck in the atmosphere and then inject it at very high pressure. We're talking about 2,400 pounds of pressure for these pipelines, and higher pressures at these wellheads. Like if your car tire is 35, maybe it's 50, maybe it's less. 2,000 pounds of pressure. We don't see that amount of pressure in the pipelines that we have, gas pipelines. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing. It's also incredibly hard to maintain technology. And I believe that's why we had that 90% failure rate previously. And since then, we haven't seen, if you have a technology that purports to be a solution and maybe there's some failure, well, what's the iteration? You expect there to be an improvement, but we've only seen deregulation and, tax incentives and declarations that, oh, it's good, without any deliberation, rather than some kind of technological improvements. For the climate, I think that there's some very low-hanging fruit in Louisiana, and we've got about 7,000 idle wells, oil wells that don't produce anything to market, but a lot of them are leaking out on the Louisiana coast in the wetlands. Those are wells that my grandfather drilled in Plaquemines Parish and Lafourche Parish. We could be putting a lot of Louisiana workers back to work, plugging those wells, and that's a good thing for safety. We have about 2,000 oil spills in the Gulf a year, and a lot of them are in Louisiana waters from these old wells. So we did work hard to make remediation of the old wells part of the Louisiana Climate Plan. And that's just, if we spent these billions and billions of dollars coming from the US Treasury for CCS on that instead, that's a much quicker
Yeah.
climate solution as well as a public safety solution.
You mean capping the wells? Capping the wells, Scott?
Plugging them, yeah.
Yeah.
Plugging them and getting them out of there. Some of these old pipelines and wells have gotten in the way of barrier island restoration in Timberware. We just have a lot of old junk out there. It could be used for scrap. I think we are seeing more movement on that. But this is, I don't know, I guess my boss would maybe say you can't call it tax fraud, but it does seem to be this solution that has not produced the results that it advertises in terms of climate.
Yeah.
Instead, it will destroy uh, the Air Projects project will destroy over 600 acres of wetland, which also sequester carbon.
600 acres of wetlands?
600 acres of wetlands from Ascension into St. John and Tangipahoa parishes that we have to figure out some way to mitigate under the law. I think the reason they backed away from the EIS has to do with that, because we already have a lot of industrial impact in the basin, and most of the existing wetlands are already set up to mitigate for those previous projects. So you're seeing that when they try to place this pipeline into the swamp, they're running the pipeline through tree planting projects that were conducted to mitigate for the previous damages. So it's just,
Wow.
there's no more room in Lake Maurepas for this kind of thing. We're not going to be able to recreate and relax when you have a 2,000 pound pipeline sitting 50 feet away. I think there are tremendous questions about, can you evacuate when something goes wrong from a pipeline like this, even if you're 2,000 feet away from such a high pressure pipeline. If something goes wrong, you've got to get away in less than 20 minutes, and you
Wow.
can't spend more than a couple of minutes in a plume.
And that's something, Scott, that's something that we haven't even considered. Danielle, maybe you've thought about it, but that's something that I haven't even considered. I've considered the feasibility of evacuation with regard to hurricanes, but I've never thought about it with regard to a CCS burst or accident. That could be a real problem.
Well, Treasurer Fleming brought that up when he came on our show, that there was I can't remember where it happened. Maybe it was Mississippi, that there was a CO2 rupture, and people were passed out. Like, people just couldn't get out. Their cars don't work when this is concentrated. And so it's a huge risk to literally people's lives.
In that case, that was Satarsha, Mississippi, in Yazoo County, just on up I-55 a couple hours, where we have an existing pipeline that was built in that 2008 era. And interestingly enough, in 2008, when they built the pipeline, maybe they remembered something about what had happened a couple years earlier. They built this pipeline far to the north, and they did not, they did not build it so close to the coast. I think we probably have forgotten some of the lessons from Hurricane Katrina that were now, in 2008, they were too scared to build it in the wetlands. But in 2025, I think they've forgotten how bad it is to put a steel project so close to the hurricane risk.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
there
true.
was an event in Satarsha. It happened because there was a heavy rain and some land movement, and the pipeline split at a girth weld, so it was 100% opening, and three counties had to respond because Yazoo County itself did not have the capacity, did not have the fire trucks with the oxygen to go into the plume. People were fishing on a riverbank a mile and a half away, and they were put out. They were on the ground and had to be evacuated by the fire department and emergency response, who were, in on oxygen bottles from the back of the fire truck. And in some cases, the fire departments were walking people out, right? Because they couldn't put their vehicles into the plume either. That response went on for at least 4 hours, according to Jerry Briggs, who was an emergency responder in that event that we invited to the legislature. And so what happens if you have this kind of situation on water? You can't walk out.
Yeah.
And so it's just wholly unacceptable to do this in these places, our places in Louisiana where we transport by boat.
Yeah.
And Scott, as you were talking, it just really struck me how the social contract between these oil companies and the state is broken, and the social contract between the politicians and the people is broken. Because if any of that chain was working, we wouldn't be in this fight right now. The politicians would hear us, and the companies would be acting in the best interest of the people of the state that they serve. But what we're seeing instead is money is driving this, and everything else be damned.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Most definitely. The
Great point.
money is coming directly from the Treasury in the form of it's called a tax credit 45Q, but it's actually a direct payment to a company like Air Products or ExxonMobil or OxyChem is another company. You can be sure that they've taken loans out on this, and it's $85 per ton. And for a project like Air Products, which is an ammonia plant in Ascension, a pipeline in the swamp, and then high pressure injection wells in the lake itself. That kind of capital expenditure is about 7 billion, and probably about 6 billion of that would be from the US taxpayer. So these projects are almost completely funded by us, and yet are
How
going in.
perverse.
It is truly
Yeah.
perverse, and you talk about adding insult to injury. Scott, what is it? We're pretty close to a group called Save My Louisiana and other anti-CCS groups here in Louisiana. Really active people. And one of the phrases that I learned from them is dumping ground. Louisiana is going to be the dumping ground for carbon capture sequestration. What is it about our state, the terrain, that makes us so attractive for carbon capture sequestration? Is there something uniquely attractive about our state?
There are some geological considerations that if we hadn't had 3 generations of oil drilling might be attractive. We have certain saltwater formations where, in theory, the carbon could remain. The problem is it's a slippery fish once it's put out there, down there, and it doesn't stay put. So even in some very high tech, well funded places like Norway, the technology hasn't worked. But the issue with Louisiana is, yes, we have these saltwater formations that they would like to inject into, but we have so many orphan wells and so many existing wells that I think it negates that geological benefit.
And
But there's
Chris, if you
also a
were
big
asking me,
political push. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Scott, I was just going to say, if Chris were asking me, I would say it's less the ecology and more the proclivity of our politicians to follow the money. I mean, you can look at the AI developments in these giant databases and see that. I mean, those things are not bringing any jobs or any benefit to our state. It's only costing taxpayers money. And yet here we are seeing the politicians throwing a party to celebrate the fact that they're bringing this quote unquote industry to Louisiana that's going to cost the taxpayers money and destroy our landscape, you know? So sorry for that rant, Scott.
Oh no, that's true. It is
She does
true. I
that
think
periodically.
I haven't heard this explicitly, but for different kinds of industrial developments, as a wetland specialist, I'm watching the wetland permits, and the type of permits that are applied for are directly tied to these shifting winds of where the money wants to go. And so CCS has we're looking at over 4,000 acres of wetlands destruction from it happening all in once, and mostly connected to this political push, since again all this, the majority of the money, vast majority of the money, is connected to this tax credit.
Yeah. And to your point, Danielle, on this about the political proclivity for this, it's so well phrased. All you have to do is contrast our response in Louisiana to this issue to that of Florida, whose governor has called carbon capture sequestration a scam that is just going to cause so much harm, and he simply won't allow it in the state of Florida. And what a difference! It's like night and day, Florida and Louisiana. So I think that certainly corroborates your point. I mean, it would be difficult to argue that Louisiana is more suitable for carbon capture sequestration geographically than Florida is. Yet their governor has taken a very strong, and their legislature, I think, with the exception of a few, has taken a pretty strong stand against this.
Well, I just think it's really pathetic and pandering the way that this whole issue has been approached. Because if you think about it, the first thing that was sold to us was that this was going to help the environment. And then whenever they decided that that wasn't really working anymore, they said, you know what, actually, it's going to create a lot of jobs. Well, guess what? We know it's not going to do either, and it's going to destroy both. So they just, I think the people behind this must think we're really stupid.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
well,
think they're
well, I
yeah.
think they're starting. I think that they're beginning more and more to realize that we're not stupid, and that people are awake and are engaged on this. What about Scott? Is this a is the position of Healthy Gulf on this pretty much a consensus among environmental groups at this point, or are there some that are not weighing in perhaps as much as you would like them to be?
Yes, we've had, a part of our membership is in Mississippi. So our board is in Mississippi. So we've been in opposition to this technology. It hasn't gone well, the Kemper Coal project from back in the day. So when this new round was announced in 2022, we were talking to our friends in New York with the senator there about how this was going to be terrible. And we know that if they pass something out of New York and West Virginia, where's it going to come? It's going to come to us. So we were pleading with national organizations not to support this, but I think we do believe the climate crisis is urgent, and their opinion was that it's urgent enough to roll over our concerns. Of course, we agreed with that. I think we're pulling people away. The people in New York who support it in theory. And I do a lot of work, even this year and last year, talking to folks, bringing some of them the realities of what it looks like when these projects hit the ground, and the realities of what happens in Mississippi and Louisiana when you put unsafe projects in our dynamic geology that we have here, when you put it in the path of the storm. So we are making progress, but there are large environmental groups that still support this technology. That I think a couple of years ago, we got the Environmental Defense Fund to at least say, well, we support it, but you have to stay out of wetlands and you have to use high quality steel. You have to do certain things to address some of our concerns. But if you look at the projects that are being proposed, a lot of them are in wetlands. A lot of them don't want to use the higher quality steel. So yeah, we are doing work on that side to try to pull national organizations like in New York, where they're not going to have any of these projects, away from support of the technology. And I think a lot of our representatives are working the more, on the conservative side of just, this is an immense government expense. If
Yeah.
all the projects proposed for Louisiana were to be built and to operate at their nameplate, we're going to inject this many tons under the earth, it would be over $200 billion over 12 years. So this is a significant government expense for a technology that just has not performed and along the way is very unsafe and very destructive of everything we're trying to preserve with our land and water.
Yeah. And what good is saving the climate if you destroy the environment on the way? There's nothing left.
Right. So I
Scott,
think, yeah,
are
yeah.
are y'all is Healthy Gulf, I meant to ask you earlier when we were talking about the Q45 tax credits, or is your organization actively lobbying the federal government to shut down those credits?
Well, we're a C3, and mostly we
Okay.
take action informing people about their action, their rights under the law to push their government agencies. So our lobbying is limited. We have been in conversation with our state representatives, and we have a growing coalition of opposition. It's interesting, Orleans Parish, 80% votes 80% one way, banned the technology, and they have home rule, so they're able to do that. Livingston Parish votes 80% the other way. They have attempted to ban it. They have issued moratoria and slowdowns and setbacks. But then, if it's the middle of the road people who haven't woken up yet. So we talk to everybody we can because we do believe this is a waste of money and a waste of land at a
Yeah.
tremendous danger. And there is a group in DC that we communicate with called Food and Water Watch that has a CO2 action network that has been sending letters to the Senate in particular on this. But our representatives in Louisiana, Mr. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. Mr. Shamerhorn out of District 24 in particular has a wonderful letter to President Trump. I
I've
believe that
seen it.
was last.
And there are with a number with I think 20 or 21 other state reps, and a couple that I've heard more recently want to be added to it. So that was a very positive sign. I think that letter came out just a few days ago. Huh, Scott?
Yes. So
Yeah.
we've seen the support for this technology is bipartisan, but also the opposition is bipartisan.
Yeah.
So it's an
And an
interesting issue.
increasing right here in Louisiana, an increasing coalition of people who are opposed to it. You can hear the drumbeat steadily getting louder and louder and louder because of all of the issues associated with CCS, including the ones that you raised today. Barry Huggins, who's a very good friend of our show and a chemical engineer who's followed this issue for a long time, calls CCS the biggest and most fraudulent theft of funds from the public treasury in U.S. history, while our country is $36 trillion in debt. And it's truly a shame that we are where we are now. Uh, we feel, at least I feel, optimistic that because of people like you, groups like yours, and others throughout the state who have come together perhaps for different reasons to fight against this. I feel very optimistic that we're going to get some vindication and some justice on the issue. I hope you feel that way.
Indeed. And that's why we're inviting everybody to come out on November 4th, 6 p.m., New Wine Church in St. John. We'll be talking with Kim Coates about a second hearing at the Lions Club in Ponchatoula, which maybe your listeners have been there before. There were quite a few people at the Lions Club. And if we can't get a second hearing, then we'll at least have a bus from the Lions Club to take people from the north side of the lake to the south side.
And Scott, if people want to find the information on that, you gave me the link. I'll put it both in the chat and in the show notes. Can people get to it directly from this healthygulf.org as well?
It's currently not live on our webpage, but if you follow us on Facebook, we'll be
On
posting
Facebook.
information on
Okay.
how to get to the church, maybe how to sign up for a bus. But we do expect, we got a big church. There's going to be hundreds of people. So come on out and meet your neighbors on all sides of the lake fighting this to preserve our land.
Excellent. And we will get your Facebook link and put that in the show notes as well for people who want to attend.
Absolutely. Scott, that's certainly a cause worth getting involved in and engaging in for sure. One of the most critical issues of our time, in my view. And thank you for your work, sir. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope to visit again soon, sir.
Thanks so much, y'all. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too, Scott. It's so amazing to me, Chris, that the lobbyists for this have have overtaken our legislators, and now they're having to claw it back. Look at them having to go cowering to President Trump, asking him to clean up their freaking mess. I'm not saying that they wouldn't needed to have appealed to President Trump on the Q45 tax credits, regardless of the way they voted, but they sure as heck would have a lot less urgency about them had they done the right thing during session their damn selves.
Absolutely. And to be honest, they should be calling for a special
Yes,
legislative
they should.
session right now, right here in Louisiana, to clean up their mess. We shouldn't have to call on President Trump for this. We have plenary authority under the Ninth and 10th Amendments of the United States Constitution to reconvene, and we have all the authority we need to repeal this, to rescind this. And I think that instead of reaching out to President Trump, which I think is a good thing and certainly could be done in conjunction with a session, they need to be, as a matter of utmost urgency, calling a session and going in and reversing this. A number of them have admitted that they made a mistake when this was ushered into the state of Louisiana by voting for this. And to their credit, they've acknowledged it and they've done what they can legislatively to try to fix it. Right now is the time for them they should be in session right now, taking action to reverse this. Every one of these legislators should be on their social media. They should be reaching out to their constituents. They should be reaching out especially to the governor right now, urging him to participate in a special session and demanding that he sign legislation rescinding this. That's what they should be doing. A letter to President Trump is a good thing, but that's not nearly enough and probably not even the primary focus right now, or it
Exactly.
shouldn't be.
Exactly. And I think about the lobbying, and this is an issue that we, the people, will have to overcome by sheer force of numbers. You think about this past session, Chris, what are some issues that lobbyists overcame the will of the people on? It was the gold and silver as transactional currency. That was overcome by the will of the bankers rather than the will of the people. Election integrity. You think about Senator Hodges' bill to protect our military installations and to protect our voting infrastructure from foreign adversaries. That was overcome by, I'm not sure if it was lobbyists. Actually, I have no idea what that was overcome by, but a spirit of stupid is what it was overcome
Danielle, I
by.
don't believe it was overcome by lobbyists because on her bill in Senate Judiciary A, I don't think there were any lobbyists who testified.
Well,
It
they may
was
not have shown their faces, but
may
I
not have
wonder if
shown their
phone
faces.
calls were
Yeah.
made.
But that's true. That's certainly possible. But her bill, yeah, was killed in Senate Jude A. And speaking of overcoming the will of the people, you don't think a majority of Louisiana citizens want our military to have authority to expropriate land owned by our foreign enemies that's within
Right?
50 miles of a military installation? That was her bill that was defeated in a Republican dominated Senate Judiciary Committee. I guarantee you 80-90% of Louisiana citizens would support that. They certainly support moving away from these vulnerable election computers, which every cyber expert in the world knows can be hacked and manipulated, to a serialized paper ballot voting system. But they have ignored the will of a majority of Louisiana citizens. Look at the vaccine mandates. Look at all the terror Louisiana citizens endured having to get a vaccine in total violation of the Nuremberg Code and their medical autonomy. And so, yes, and maybe the common theme among all of it is powerful lobbyists and money.
Well, the common theme, I think, are two things. One is getting our elections straight, because if our elections are straight, and I know I am a constant drumbeat on this, but if our elections were truly honest and transparent and trustworthy, then the politicians would answer to the people. I even wonder, if our elections were truly honest, if the people would have, again, power than even the governor of the state of Louisiana. It's a bold statement to make, Chris, that maybe the people would have more power than the governor, but maybe we would.
And you know what, Danielle? That's exactly the way it is supposed to be. because the only reason why the governor or any other elected official in Louisiana has any power at all is that we have ceded our fundamental sovereign authority to them, to the government, so that they can secure our fundamental rights. They don't grant us our rights, they don't bequeath us our rights. They secure rights that we already have naturally. That is their job. And too many of them have forgotten that that is their fundamental responsibility. And I think, it is just it's unfortunate, but as I said when Scott was on the show, and it applies not just to carbon capture sequestration, all the other issues that you and I've been talking about for the past few minutes apply too. I think Louisiana citizens are waking up, and as I've said many times before, I think the fact that so many are engaged, educated, and aware now of what's really going on and have a true healthy skepticism of our government now is because of President Trump and everything that he went through, all the persecution, all the humiliation, and yet he still moved forward and he exposed so much fraud and corruption in our government. And I think he's just due an enormous debt of gratitude for the fact that increasing numbers of citizens across Louisiana and the country are aware of what type of government is really ruling over us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to maybe come back to the issue at hand for a moment, Chris, and say, it's beautiful that the truth would bring people from very different perspectives together. Scott and Healthy Gulf are coming at this from a climate change perspective, but they have recognized that this is going to destroy our wetlands in pursuit of something that would render everything null and void anyway.
Yes.
You think about Gary Musgrove and Colonel, what was his last name? Oh, help me out.
Guillory. Guillory.
Colonel Guillory, and the fact that this is a constitutional issue, this is a personal sovereignty issue, a state sovereignty issue. This is a violation of our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a violation of property rights. And you think about Louisiana being sportsman's paradise. Look at the way this would destroy our wetlands, our ecology, the beautiful wildlife that is so unique to the state of Louisiana. I went out on the boat with my family this weekend out down in the bayous, and there's no place on earth like this. Why would we cede that over for a few dimes? This is traitorous behavior by our legislature and by our governor.
It absolutely is. And they absolutely have to halt this and they have to make this right, Danielle. And if they don't, quite frankly, I know that there are many of them are going to get South Dakota come reelection. As you know, and as we've talked about, 14 representatives from South Dakota were driven out of office because they failed to stand up on this issue for the citizens of South Dakota. And I'll tell you, because of LACAG, because of the State of Freedom, because of Save My Louisiana and other groups, and not just on CCS, but on other issues, many of these people are not going to be reelected because Louisiana citizens are becoming more engaged and more informed. When you start saying to someone, this private company, if you don't want to give up your property for this activity, then they have a right to take it from you. They have a right to take your property. And people say, what are you talking about? There's nothing more fundamentally un-American. And I think that people, even people whose property is not directly affected by this, are smart enough to understand the precedent and put two and two together and say, if they can do this to that man's property or that woman's property for this reason, tomorrow they can do it to my property for any other reason. And that's the precedent that's being set. And that's why it's so important that this be defeated. It's such a
Yeah,
huge issue.
it is such a huge issue, and it all comes back to elections. I know I've said that already, but I do want to just make the point and ask people to be prayerful over the next couple of days and however long it takes. Of course, Tina Peters is still in prison, wrongfully imprisoned because of her stance, because of the action she took to protect her constituents in Mesa County, Colorado, over the elections. And Colonel Reynolds, who we had on the show just a few weeks back, is being booked tomorrow because of actions he took to validate the elections through exit polls. He's being indicted by the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Danielle, for standing 60 feet too close to a polling place while he was conducting a lawful exit poll.
And
60
that
feet
sounds
too
really
close.
familiar. Doesn't that sound really familiar to you, Chris?
It sounds extremely familiar, and it makes me angry all over again because of SB 80 this last session, where a Republican dominated legislature has now outlawed law abiding citizens from conducting lawful exit polls at polling precincts. But the right of assembly and speech of CNN, MSNBC, and other bona fide news organizations is still protected in the state of Louisiana. So we cannot remind our listeners enough, and it's so important to bring this up in connection with what is happening to Colonel Reynolds right now, that in Louisiana, because of our Republican legislature and our Republican governor, ordinary Louisiana citizens who've lived here their whole lives, who've paid taxes here, who've bled here, cried here, raised their kids here, do not have the legal right in Louisiana to conduct a lawful exit poll at a polling precinct. But CNN and MSNBC and other bona fide news organizations can come into our state, conduct whatever kind of exit poll they want to conduct, leave our state, use that data for whatever reason they want, and they are perfectly protected and perfectly fine. It is an absolute disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace that this bill even got out of a committee in the Louisiana legislature. And one of the top priorities we're going to have next session is repealing this nonsense. This is an absolute, I guarantee you, if our founding fathers have ever flipped in their grave about anything that has occurred in this state, they are doing somersaults in their graves right now, because there's nothing that defiles the Constitution more than this bill, authored by Comrade Senator Greg Miller, to coin your term, Danielle, passed by our legislature and signed by our governor. It's an absolute disgrace.
It is a disgrace. And if any of the legislators who are going to be running for reelection in just in a few short months have 1 ounce of self-respect, integrity, or humility, they would be calling for a special session called Let's Clean Up Our Messes, because they have crapped the bed. They crapped the bed really big in the last couple of sessions, but especially this past year. They need to clean this up. They need to clean up the gerrymandered congressional district, which, by the way, is going to the Supreme Court for another hearing tomorrow. And while I'm at it, I should just mention that Thursday, Paul Hurd, who's on the legal team defending Bert Calle, he is going to be giving his take on the arguments before the Supreme Court. That is going to be here on Thursday, the Supreme Court hearing. The arguments are going to be heard tomorrow. But there's so much that this legislature, Chris, needs to go back and right. They need to clean up a lot of that insurance garbage that they pushed that made life more difficult for Tim Temple.
Absolutely.
There's a lot, that just makes me feel like the lobbyists have won, the big money interests have won, and the people have been silenced. And if these folks want the prayer of a chance of reelection, they need to clean up their messes.
And they need to do it now. And I think, Danielle, that I would be remiss if we closed today without commending the 11 state senators back in 2024 who stood against SB 8, which was this racially gerrymandered district that handed a congressional seat to the leftist Democrat Cleo Fields due to the pressure of our governor and even our attorney general. An obnoxious piece of legislation that Paul Hurd said is a classic racial gerrymander. I'm looking forward to having him on the show. But the senators, Republican senators who stood up against this bill were Elaine, Bass, Kathy, Facey, Foyle, Lambert, Miller, and we will give credit where credit is due, Greg Miller, Morris, Presley, Seabaugh, and Talbot, those 11 state senators under enormous pressure from the governor recognized the threat that this district posed politically, and they recognize that it's constitutionally indefensible. So those state senators need to be recognized, and we're proud to do so here.
And Chris, I will mention that we are not so Pollyanna as to believe that they all did it out of the goodness of their hearts. There were definitely political trade-offs that had to happen. I mean, let's be honest. We know that Garrett Graves was being axed out of that, and there were people who were in his district that needed to vote against this to save face with him. So I don't want to just, look, people vote the right way. We don't care why they vote the right way. Just vote the right way. But don't think that we don't see that there's
Sure.
something else going on.
Yes, they don't become angels by any means because of this vote. But as you said, Danielle, regardless of why you do something, just do the right thing. And these senators did, and they did resist an enormous amount of pressure to do
That's
so.
right.
So we give them credit for that.
We will give them credit for that, regardless of their motives. One final announcement, Chris. Tomorrow, I am hoping I will have a special guest, a young evangelist from Nigeria, talking about his passion for Jesus and how he is taking the word of God to the streets there. It's just going to depend on connectivity. So y'all pray that that interview is able to happen without any interference, because what an incredible young man. It's going to be a great interview.
I look forward to listening to that. And you have a straight line to the man, but we'll do what we can.
Thank you, Chris. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
no question about it. And I want to encourage people, Danielle, also to continue to support and share the State of Freedom. We are faithfully representing the voice of ordinary Louisiana citizens on a whole host of issues. As people know, our loyalty is to the Constitution and ordinary Louisiana citizens. We are your voice, uncensored, unapologetic, and unafraid by God's holy grace. So continue to listen, continue to subscribe, continue to share, because we will not stop until the State of Freedom is heard in every corner, in every district, in every parish, in every home in the state of Louisiana, because knowledge is power, and we are your power, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. And of course, support LACAG. LACAG is your voice in the legislature. Chris is running around the state, talking to people, letting them know how their legislators voted, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's changing hearts and minds. I mean, I think this CCS letter is in large part credit due to you, Chris, and your relentless, determined speaking of the truth, speaking of the facts. No personal attacks. It's just straight up the way people voted. And sometimes we also have to talk about their behavior, but I would
Well, that's
say
true. Sometimes it's appropriate, Danielle, to talk about their behavior.
it is. It is. They're supposed to be representing us, so their behavior is fair game, especially inside the halls of the legislature. But
You bet
anyway,
your
all that
behavior.
to say, support Chris, support LACAG. We love you guys so much. We're just so grateful for this opportunity to be able to be here, to be able to be a voice of truth, to be able to, I don't know, speak about things that are genuinely interesting to us and that stand to impact the way that our state and our nation work.
Absolutely. And I thank God every day that we live in a country given to us by 56 brave patriots who signed a document when they had absolutely nothing, and the forces arrayed against them were absolutely overwhelming, to the point where only a small percentage of the colonists even joined in their effort. Many of them, as in our own case today, chose to play it safe and remain loyal to a tyrannical British crown. But those brave 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, who bequeathed to us the fundamental right of free speech, is the only reason why you and I have the freedom to do this. So I thank those guys every single day. And frankly, since I believe they're in heaven, I would ask them to look down and maybe put in a good word for us to the big man,
Yeah.
because I think that they have the ability to do that. So God bless you, Danielle. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And in the words of the great William F. Buckley Jr., inveighing, we shall go.
We shall go, Chris. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Love you.
Meet the world's first living, full-spectrum, certified organic CBDA hemp extract. Nesa's hemp oil was extracted from seed to bottle without chemicals, solvents, or heavy metals, and it surpasses world-class standards for purity. This pure and powerful CBDA has been proven to reduce aches and pains, ease mental tension, and promote better sleep. To get yours today, visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. Hey, Danielle Walker here. I'd love for you to check out my online boutique, Luxe Lion. My mission for Luxe Lion is to showcase innovative African designers and sustainable, mission-driven brands. To do that, I bring you stunningly beautiful, handcrafted jewelry and accessories from some of my absolute favorite places on earth. Small batch wholesale for storefronts is also available. Join me in celebrating African artistry and shop now at luxelion.us. Use promo code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your purchase. Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit LACAG.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.